Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 2nd of February 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. And today I'm joined by Mark Anderson. Welcome to the programme, Mark.
Thank you, Mike. Great to be back.
Right. Okay. Well, we're going to get started with some American news and Hillary Clinton, because over the weekend, the US federal government declared 22 of Clinton's emails top secret. And these, of course, were held on her home email server. This was the email server that she seems to have set up while she was Secretary of State. And she was doing all her communication via this unsecured home email server. There's never been any particular justification as to why she did this. It's pretty obvious, though, to anybody, I think, isn't it, Mark, that really she was trying to give some kind of plausible deniability to certain things. But anyway, what's interesting about this is that the White House spokesperson there in the little video clip that's on that Associated Press article there, saying that these emails were not classified at the time that they were sent, but they are classified now, which this to me smacks of cover-up, unbelievable cover-up. So things have been reclassified, and he says this is absolutely normal that things would be reclassified in this way. But when there are certain things around this whole business around Benghazi and all this thing. What did she know? What didn't she know? There's clearly some kind of cover-up going on here, Mark.
Certainly. Well, you have to look at the fact that it's Hillary Clinton. If you look at it in the broader context, cover-up is the name of the game for the Clintons. And we can never forget, and it can't be emphasized too much, that Bill and Hillary Clinton virtually all the time have done things as a team, even if one is in the background at any given time. National security was put at a huge risk during Chinagate on Bill Clinton's watch when he was president. All sorts of top secret technology was funneled over to China in exchange for Democratic National Committee campaign donations. This had to do with the election and re-election of Bill Clinton. So the Clintons are well acquainted with this kind of now you see it, now you don't operations. This is just another chapter in the long, sordid book of Bill and Hillary Clinton. And certainly to say that they were not classified one day and then they're classified the next, I mean, yeah, that does happen from time to time. That doesn't mean it's right. That doesn't mean it's logical just because it's quote unquote normal, as the White House spokesman said. But it's just more evidence that the Clintons can't be trusted to be dog catcher, much less have one of them be president again. And yesterday, Bilderberger Charlie Rose, the PBS TV icon who now works for CBS News This Morning, had Hillary Clinton on for a glowing interview, giving her millions of dollars worth of free airtime, even in the wake of stories like you're talking about. So the whole thing is quite disturbing, how much the media gives her a pass despite the Clintons' history.
What's interesting about this, I think, is that there has been discussion about whether there would be any kind of indictment. It's pretty clear that the federal authorities saying that Hillary Clinton, if there is going to be an indictment over this, Hillary Clinton isn't going to be in the frame for it. But it seems to me that there seems to be a situation here where, on one hand, there's the danger of this being politicized at the time of people are running for election. On the other hand, you don't want somebody running for election that may be guilty of a criminal offense. Do you think the timing of this is interesting in the sense that it's been all this is being released right in the middle of the Democratic primaries in order to sort of divert or at least try to brush this under the carpet?
Well, maybe the timing can't be helped. Trey Gowdy, a South Carolina congressman, has, through his committees, has tried to get to the bottom of Benghazi, again, being one of many Clinton scandals, countless ones. And I think the fact that it comes up during an election, the earlier part of the 2016 elections, is just the way the cookie crumbles. Either Hillary is fit to be in high office or she's not. You know, we can't split hairs too much, and the timing is just the way it goes, the way it crunches out. And so be it. It's the media, particularly the American media, that shouldn't be so ready to give her such a free pass and always call her the front runner based on flimsy polls. We need to really be asking why someone would even want to run for president when they have these kind of top secret emails on their personal computer. If I had that on my computer, I wouldn't be running for president for the very fact that I'd expect the questions to be asked.
Right. Well, let's move on a little bit because RT today reporting that Hillary seems to be receiving huge amounts of money from George Soros. Perhaps unsurprising. It's absolutely brilliant. So basically, the point that they're making here is that Bernie Sanders has raised his money mainly through crowdfunding, $20 million. They're saying that Hillary had $41 million raised on her behalf last year, and Soros pumping in a small $6 million donation to one of the pro-Clinton super PACs. This shouldn't really come as a surprise, should it?
Well, as I reported recently in American Free Press, and we talked about on your show before, Hillary is a Council on Foreign Relations apparatchik. She's an internationalist. She's not a working class Democrat by any stretch of the imagination. All of that is just theater. Bernie Sanders, whatever his faults, some say he's too far to the left, he's too much of a socialist, but he's an honest leftist and he's an honest socialist. I've met him personally on Capitol Hill. He says what he means what he says. He has truth in labeling. If Bernie tells you something, he means it. Hillary, the George Soros connection, fits right in with the kind of international organized crime syndicate that she has walked in tandem or in parallel with. And it comes as no surprise because Soros, the internationalist, naturally supports Hillary, the internationalist. And Soros, of course, is well known for all sorts of surreptitious funding of branches of the Occupy movement, creating false opposition to Wall Street, and having his hand in the coup in Ukraine, where Poroshenko was put in, along with Yatsenyuk, to overthrow Viktor Yanukovych in that coup in early 2014 that brought about this Ukrainian nightmare. And so Soros' fingers are in a lot of pies, and there's no surprise that it ends up in the Hillary camp.
It's interesting what you say about Bernie Sanders. I'd like to know more about that. Just if you give us two minutes on it, because obviously in the last month or two, he has suddenly jumped on the anti-Wall Street bandwagon, calling for Glass-Steagall and separation of the banks and so on. That was something that Martin O'Malley was really the mouthpiece for up until now. So do you think this is more than just Bernie Sanders noticing a chink in Hillary Clinton's armor? Do you think he's being honest about his anti-Wall Street stance in recent weeks?
Yeah, because he's always been anti-Wall Street. He's one of the best orators on the Senate floor, bar none. When Bernie speaks, people listen. He's got a real way about him, and he's always been for reinstating Glass-Steagall. And by the way, the dissolution of Glass-Steagall, was signed by Bill Clinton. The bill to dissolve Glass-Steagall was dissolved by Bill Clinton when Bill was president. Let's get that out there. Done by a Democrat, not by a Republican. And yes, Bernie's always been anti-Wall Street. He talks about the Koch brothers, and he talks a lot about the capitalist brigands that are running the United States and buying our elections. Even Sheldon Adelson, who's, like Bernie, is Jewish, but Sheldon is a major Zionist, and he's that casino magnate from Nevada who pumps even more money into the wrong causes than Soros does, and that's saying a lot. But Bernie has always been anti-Wall Street. He probably is turning up the heat a little bit, though, because, as you say, Hillary's vulnerable there because of the Soros donation and because she's really known to be pro-Wall Street behind a thin veneer of speaking against Wall Street. So for Bernie, it's a little bit of everything.
Okay, well, let's move on then, Mark. You wanted to raise the issue of the death of Lavoy Finicum, and you wanted me to highlight this particular article. Tell us a little bit.
Well, the guy that wrote this, William Norman Grigg, does this blog, Pro Libertate, and Will, as they call him for short, is a very insightful writer. He's got a lot of penetrating insights into what he writes. And he points out in here, and there's so much that could be said, that, of course, all of this was avoidable. but Finicum and this group he was with, Citizens for Constitutional Freedom, and the media would rarely, if ever, use the actual name of Ammon and Ryan Bundy and Lavoy Finicum. They actually had a name, Citizens for Constitutional Freedom. Rather, the media went out in most instances, not all, but many instances, and simply labeled them domestic terrorists. The New York Times had a piece right after Finicum's death, and the quote was supposedly from Finicum that he had said, "I would rather die than be caged," end quote. And they published this kind of menacing photo of him. And the media did a lot of other things that kind of fed into the demonizing of Ammon and Ryan Bundy and Finicum.
I mean, this was one of the early reports. Mark, face it, Oregon building takeover is terrorism. That's from CNN. That's a pretty strong headline.
Yes, it is. And let's talk a little bit about that before we come back to Will Gregg's writings. Will is particularly adept at the history of the land around there, and we'll talk a little bit in a few minutes about how much land the federal government owns in the U.S. But Juliette Kayyem, Kayyem, is a CNN national security analyst. Now, CNN did say this article is her opinion alone. They made a little bit of a disclaimer. But this gives you an idea of the way the media is operating these days. Here you have a CNN national security analyst, Juliette Kayyem, writing this article, "Face It, Oregon Building Takeover is Terrorism." And she is a current member of the Department of Homeland Security Advisory Committee under Secretary Johnson, Secretary of Homeland Security Johnson. She's on his advisory committee, and that has to do with domestic terrorism and other matters. She was Assistant Secretary for Governmental Affairs at the Department of Homeland Security under Obama until recently. She's also a lecturer at the Kennedy School of Government and a current Council on Foreign Relations member. And she also was the state of Massachusetts' first ever Undersecretary for Homeland Security. So here you have a government apparatchik, former and current, who's an academic, pretty much typical. They love to look at all these certificates on their wall and tell themselves how great they are. And she's writing in a very jaundiced manner in this article. And she's saying things like, they are dangerous, they are unforgiving, they are flouting federal law. These are exact quotes from this article you're posting. And she says that this is a group of men who is wielding terror. Excuse me, this group of men is wielding terror, quote unquote. And she went on to say, and this is in early January when the so-called occupation first happened, she went on to say, violence should be avoided at all costs because we don't want to make any of the occupiers martyrs or heroes. Well, it turns out that the shooting, although it was filmed from a high altitude helicopter, the apparent shooting by an FBI gunman of Lavoy Finicum will somewhat martyr him. He already is becoming something of a martyr or a hero, as Juliette Kayyem feared. But it's interesting where writers like Juliette will say that people like the Bundys and the Finicum are flouting the rule of law. But the federal government flouts the rule of law all the time. The federal government is more of a danger to the constitutional order than any kind of group of private citizens, armed or unarmed. The federal government routinely has wars that are undeclared, even though the Constitution requires a congressional declaration of war. That's a violation of the rule of law. Having ongoing drone attacks in several countries without explicit congressional authorization, that is another flouting of the rule of law by the U.S. federal government. And yet they'll go around and call people that are 50 miles away from the nearest town in an abandoned federal wildlife encampment, and they took over a couple buildings. People can argue maybe they should or shouldn't have taken over the buildings, but they'll call them dangerous men. They'll call them as flouting the rule of law, when abridging the rule of law is a daily occurrence, morning, noon, and night in Washington, D.C. So for analysts like Juliette Kayyem to make such vitriolic and sweeping statements is highly irresponsible and libelous, in my opinion.
But surely it reflects the state of U.S. media that they are okay. You say there was a disclaimer from CNN, but that entire commentary was highly politicized.
Yeah, well, the disclaimer doesn't mention that she's still on the advisory committee for the Homeland Security's Secretary, Mr. Johnson. That CNN disclaimer neglects to mention that. It makes it sound as if all her DHS affiliations are past tense. They are not all past tense. And any Council on Foreign Relations affiliation is questionable at the very least, because that organization believes in foreign interventionism, the war on terror. They believe generally in United Nations Agenda 21 and the way that acts as a justification for the federal government to own all this land in the first place, west of the Mississippi especially. And William Norman Grigg, in this Pro Libertate article, not only did he cover the shooting of Lavoy Finicum in a very insightful way, and I would advise readers or viewers of your show to go to that blog, Pro Libertate. You can see the name. Google that and go to that blog and read more of the details of these articles. But now the one you're showing, the other one by William Norman Grigg, this is Government Land. That's the one where Will gets into the history of this, and it's a little complex. I would advise viewers to go check it out, but simply put, the land in Harney County, Oregon, that the Bundys and Finicum and the others in the Citizens for Constitutional Freedom, that land and that government facility they occupied within that county used to be land that was set aside in trust for the Paiute and Shoshone Indians. I might be pronouncing Paiute a little wrongly, I'm not sure. But the Shoshone Indians and another tribe were given that very same area as part of a larger region in trust during the Indian Wars of the late 1800s. Then the federal government allowed settlers and squatters onto that land when it was still in trust for the Indians. And the federal government took sides with the squatters and then committed genocide against many of the Indians, with the media back then, just like today, calling for the federal government to get rid of the occupiers. But at that time, the occupiers were the American Indians of the Shoshone tribe and the other one, the Paiute, I believe it's pronounced. So history is repeating itself where the media in the U.S. is aligned with the federal government, and anybody deemed an occupier, be they the Indians of yesterday or the white ranchers of today, anyone deemed an occupier is an enemy of the state, and they must be labeled as terrorists and dealt with accordingly. So although we didn't see obvious genocide against the Bundys or against the current occupiers, we saw a buildup of federal force, and Finicum talking about how the FBI agents grew. At first they were much more conversant, and then they grew much colder and much more distant when he talked to them. He talked about that before he died. And so the feds were starting to look at this as more of a confrontation as time went by during a standoff or occupation that lasted between 3 and 4 weeks when all was said and done.
Yeah. Just before we leave this subject, I did want to highlight this article in the Los Angeles Times. Where were the FBI during the armed standoff in Oregon? Out of sight, but listening and watching. And what they're saying here is, as the armed occupation in Oregon dragged on for most of January, local law enforcement was spread thin and federal agents were nowhere to be seen. Behind the quiet facade, however, the FBI was running surveillance on the occupation and recording the activists' public statements, mostly drawn from media reports and the activists' use of social media, while FBI agents encouraged locals to report their experiences with new strangers in town. A significant amount of the FBI's information used to charge Ammon Bundy came from an activist named Pete Santilli, who was living inside the refuge and broadcasting live his conversations with fellow activists. To demonstrate a conspiracy, the government has a lower burden than it would with similar charges, such as aiding and abetting or solicitation. A conspiracy charge in federal court does not require the underlying offence to have taken place, so prosecutors can charge defendants based on their statements without proving that any crime was actually committed. This is where Santilli's broadcasts proved so useful to the FBI. And Pete Santilli is known to many people. He's been around for quite a long time. Obviously there have been a number of pretty significant spats on the internet. He's a controversial figure. And there are some people that have alleged for some time that Pete Santilli has been related to the FBI. So the fact that he's named in this Los Angeles Times article is going to be food for some of the people that would say that he's. Now, I have no evidence either way, so I can't make any statement on this. But I think what this does do, Mark, is it highlights that we need to be a little careful, a little discerning about how we use social media and particularly live streaming. So apparently what Pete Santilli has done has been to simply leave his stream running basically 24 hours a day. And so the FBI have used that as a mechanism for surveillance. I can understand why people would live stream. Recently, we were covering an eviction of a fracking protest, and that was live streamed. And that is a particular police operation. You would understand why that would be live streamed. But to just blanket live stream the day-to-day comings and goings of something like this seems to me to be risky at the very least.
Oh, certainly. Yeah, I've talked to Pete Santilli on the air at Bilderberg 2015 and at Bilderberg 2013 via the internet radio, commenting on Bilderberg both those years. And he did a good job and always put it out there about Bilderberg and, credit where credit's due. I think you're right, Mike. I think all we can really say about this is that it's, number one, it doesn't make journalistic sense that I can see to just have the live streaming going on through all the mundane goings-on of life, eating meals, using the restroom, sitting around, having minor and major discussions, really nothing newsworthy happening in particular, although the event is newsworthy in a general sense, yes. But yeah, just to live stream for the sake of it, nonstop, and keep it running, I would know better than to do that, because personally, I can foresee how the powers that be could use my live streaming if I were to do that and use it in the wrong way. So the best reason not to do it is precisely because it'll be monitored and surveilled and used. So there definitely was a momentary lapse of wisdom there. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Right. Let's move on with some other news then, because obviously lots still going on in the Middle East. The Guardian here reporting that the Saudi inquiry into war crime claims in Yemen is inadequate, according to rights groups. And I'd say that this is a massive understatement, to say the least. So basically, you're accused of committing some form of war crime. We have covered this in a number of occasions, and frankly, Saudi Arabia's activities in Yemen are a disgrace. But the Guardian article here saying Saudi Arabia's pledge to investigate allegations of civilian casualties caused by its bombing campaign in Yemen has been dismissed as inadequate by human rights groups. Mark, I know this is probably hijacking you a little bit, but I mean, how can there be any justification in a country which is bombing another country and which is being accused of war crimes, investigating itself to see whether what it was doing was all right or not?
Well, certainly, it's a charade from the start. So these rights groups are being kind when they use the word inadequate. Untrustworthy would be a better word. Of course, the Saudi Arabian family-made regime, rich in oil and short on morality, is a ardent ally of the U.S., and a lot of people don't fully realize at least an operational ally of the Israeli state. There's a little bit of deniability there, perhaps, but the Saudi kings, will do what's best to suit their rich lifestyle and cut off the hands or heads of anyone that defies them within their own country. That being said, it's a no-brainer. I mean, these things have to be done independently, and so it's a loser right from the start. I'm not sure what to add, except that it's like the CIA having investigated itself many times in the past. It just doesn't hold water. you have to have an independent investigator to begin with. But the drone wars are, for so many reasons, a wrongful and scary application of robotics and automation, which I think we'll be getting into in a few minutes.
Well, indeed, but of course, Saudi has been accused of using cluster bombs and worse in Yemen, and certainly civilian targets, including hospitals. I mean, as that Guardian article points out, Médecins Sans Frontières hospitals have been hit 3 times in Yemen so far. Lots of civilian casualties, and really this conflict in Yemen getting almost no coverage in the mainstream press. Sorry, I showed this. This is the next article here. UK considering military action against ISIS in Libya. So France and the UK bombed Libya back to the Stone Age a few years ago. Apparently we haven't done the job well enough. We've created the problems in Libya. We've got to go back now and do some more bombing. It's also interesting that this article says that the Ministry of Defence has not confirmed reports it's willing to send as many as 1,000 troops to the country that has fallen into chaos following the violent overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi and Allied airstrikes in 2011. And what continues to stagger me, and when I'm asking for comment here, Mark, but I'm really asking for comment on the media itself, because what really staggers me is how they can be quite as brass-necked as they are when they publish this kind of thing. If we read what they say again, it says the country has fallen into chaos since the violent overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi and Allied airstrikes in 2011. So we did that, but they don't make that point, and this is really a pretty disingenuous approach by the mainstream press these days. This has got to be one of the reasons why so few people pay any attention to them anymore.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of some of the scenes in the movie V for Vendetta. The media becomes less and less credible, and people start watching it and going, bollocks, bollocks. And, they begin to realize it's all a dog and pony show. And yeah, this is as much a study of the media as it is the government. Sometimes the media are even more pro-war than the governments, and that's no easy task. But we mustn't forget that the mass migration talked about at the World Economic Forum in Switzerland, the destruction of Libya, the breaking down of these countries into feuding tribes and different sectors that war against each other. The basic societal breakdown is brought on by Western, NATO, US, France, UK military action. There's a cause and an effect here, a result of our Western foreign policy that's reaping very, very bad fruit, and the U.S. and UK media and other mainstream media will not taste the coffee here. They will not admit or acknowledge that this is blowback for Western imperialism.
Indeed. Now, you've mentioned the World Economic Forum several times now, and let's just remind ourselves of their annual meeting, which was over a week or two ago, and you and I haven't had a chance to speak about this on this program yet, so I thought we might do that today. Just as a reminder, this was the meeting overview, Mastering the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and what they were basically saying was that the Fourth Industrial Revolution is, if we look on ahead a little second, they were saying the First Industrial Revolution was steam, water, mechanical production equipment, that the Second Industrial Revolution was the division of labour, electricity and mass production, that the Third Industrial Revolution was electronics, IT, automated production, and that the Fourth Industrial Revolution is what they're describing as cyber-physical systems. And they were talking, so the focus of the conference was Mastering the Fourth Industrial Revolution. They're calling it a global imperative, and they're saying that this theme drives the design of the sessions, task forces, and private meetings at the annual meeting 2016, that it's an unparalleled platform for co-design, co-creation, and collaboration for global leaders from across business, government, international organizations, academia, and civil society to advance multiple agendas, including the global agenda, the geosecurity agenda, the economic agenda, the regional and national agenda, the industrial and business agenda, and the future agenda. So Mark, this isn't quite such a private meeting as Bilderberg, but nonetheless, a lot of the discussion points from Bilderberg are brought out for broader discussion on these annual meetings. Is that an unfair statement?
No, if you look back over the Bilderberg topics the last 2 to 3 years, you'll see cybersecurity, you'll see things to do with robotics, and this is in their own published agendas at bilderbergmeetings.org, their official website. So I think it's fair to say, at least to some limited extent, that this is a broader discussion, without acknowledging it, of what was privately and exclusively discussed at Bilderberg behind closed doors the last, say, 2 to 3 years. And part of this, of course, is noblesse oblige. You know, it's the idea that those in positions of influence and power believe that it is incumbent upon them to design our future. It is incumbent upon them to dictate how it will go and how it will be implemented and along what lines. What's conspicuously missing from this is any sense of democratic input. This is really, by and large, just the rich and mighty and their confreres and a few celebrities thrown in for window dressing, just announcing to the world as this is how we see it, this is our vision, and this is how it's going to be. Through free trade agreements, which is their favored way of economic structure, you're not going to have really economic democracy or financial or governmental democracy or democratic means to implement this. Whatever one may think of automation and robotics, which can be used for good, it's not all bad. Military drones is a bad application of automation, but it's not all bad. But it's the way it's being implemented, and it's who that's doing it. And it's always the same old crowd. And at this article you're showing that just ran an American Free Press hard copy, I talk about these U.S. top officials that are there: Ashton Carter, our Secretary of Defense; Jack Lew, our Treasury Secretary; Loretta Lynch, our Attorney General; and Michael Froman, of course, the head of the U.S. Trade Representative Office. And that represents that free trade, globalist free trade model that's the kind of economics that would be the vehicle to put this fourth industrial revolution into place. And that means corporations are calling the shots, and governments and their people have little, if any, say. And see, that's the biggest problem. Is it's not so much what they're doing as how undemocratically they're doing it, under the guise of sort of an acceptable, vehicle. They make it look palatable, but this is very, very top down from what I've seen.
Of course, one of the founders, if not the founder of the World Economic Forum, was Klaus Schwab, and he has, as I mentioned at the time, written a new book, Shaping the Fourth Industrial Revolution. He says there are three reasons why today's transformations represent not merely a prolongation of the third industrial revolution, but rather the arrival of a fourth and distinct one: velocity, scope, and systems impact. The speed of current breakthroughs has no historical precedent. When compared to the previous industrial revolutions, the fourth is evolving at an exponential rather than a linear pace. Moreover, it is disrupting almost every industry and every country, and the breadth and depth of these changes herald the transformation of entire systems of production, management, and governance. Now, of course, this isn't something that's happening naturally. It's being brought about, Mark, and if this transformation of entire systems of production, management, and governance is happening with a breadth and depth that heralds a new industrial revolution, where does that take us? If this stuff happens so quickly, people can't really keep track of where it's going.
Well, you make a good point, Mike, that it's not natural or organic in its nature. It's being pushed. The double domes in Bilderberg and the CFR, the World Economic Forum, always act like the inexorable forces of nature are upon us, and all of this is happening almost like a storm blowing in, like none of them had anything to do with it, or only minimal to do with it. But due to the way that these elites have molded our laws, the way they've gotten rid of laws that were obstacles to them, the way they've carried out everything, is to clear the path for this kind of revolution, and then they make it look more or less spontaneous when in fact it's been designed by them. I'll mention that a good counterpoint is I would suggest that viewers check out a book called Social Credit Economics by Oliver Haydorn. He paints a picture where automation and robotics can be used in a democratic, benevolent way by getting rid of the debt-based money system. But if we don't get rid of the debt-based money system and we keep the financial system we have, then automation, while it can have some benefits, can be largely a negative because it would kick people out of jobs and negate the ability of people to earn a living. So unless we change economic systems and go towards something like what Mr. Haydorn has outlined, then automation is going to take us down the wrong road, at least in some respects. Although automation itself, I think, is more or less neutral. But with the current debt-based money system that this world elite owns and operates, I'm afraid they'll take us in the wrong direction with automation and robotics toward transhumanism, toward a more dystopian future. And that could be avoided if we were to remold the financial system. So it's a mixed bag. Not everyone at the World Economic Forum is a bloodless bureaucrat, but we need to look at the system in which we're operating when we judge the direction they're taking us and the nature of the changes they're talking about.
Well, perhaps this illustrates it quite nicely, and thanks to Mark Salon for pointing this out to us. This is TechTats, and the people that are developing this technology, if you accept what they say in their video clip, and I do, are doing it with good intentions. What they're saying is that this technology can be used. It's wearable technology. It's painted on the skin, and there's some electronics placed on the skin. And their view for this technology is it would be used for medical purposes, for example, for diagnostics and for simply monitoring people, whatever medical problems that they've got. But on the other hand, they demonstrate a certain naivety with the current, as you say, the way that the ideology that the current elite uses or lives by. Where they also say that this technology could be used, for example, because that you carry personal information on a chip, which is turned into a piece of artwork on your skin, and then you can make financial purchases with it and all this kind of stuff. And you can see how this is absolutely a double-edged sword. And as you say, Mark, it absolutely is dependent on the ideology of the people that are pushing this technology as to the direction that it's going to go in. This extremely dangerous in a certain respect.
Yes, certainly under the current construct that we live in, the debt-based money system that makes automation a more threatening thing than it otherwise would be. Under the whole governmental ideology that you mentioned, Mike, yeah, those sorts of things are much more prone to be abused. The U.S. has been talking about real ID and a national ID. Of course, we hear about the idea of putting chips in our skin, but now we have the idea of a tattoo on the skin in a more topical fashion. That might seem a little more palatable and less threatening to people, which would ironically make it more dangerous because it would become more acceptable. Is the tattoo removable? Is it permanent? Those are the first questions. And I would wonder about that aspect of it. But
well, no, at this stage, it's absolutely removable. But of course, this is a step along the way. This company, this little company that has developed this technology, has just been bought out by one of the big corporations. The terms of that deal haven't been published, and you wonder where that technology would be taken, because this little company is effectively under management. So you're right to make these points, and I just wanted to also highlight this article as well, because this is published today. World's first robot-run farm to open in Japan, and it's saying that a Japanese firm said on Monday this week it would open the world's first fully automated farm with robots handling almost every step of the process, from watering seedlings to harvesting crops. Now, of course, as you point out, there are benefits to using technology in any kind of production, but of course, the more people that are pushed out of productive jobs as a result of the unbridled use of technology in this way, well, they've got to find income from somewhere. And so the danger then is that they're pushed, in fact, into government-related jobs. And in fact, what we see as a result is an increase in the size of the state. And of course, once people are beholden to the state for their incomes, then again, when you've got a potentially dangerous ideology at work, then you end up with potentially dangerous job processes and people doing things that they might not otherwise be willing to do. So as we move towards what appears to be more and more totalitarianism and in this world, unfortunately, technology is one of the drivers which is taking us there.
Yeah, and the problem is the drivers who are behind the wheel. I personally believe that we don't want to live in a work state where we're all born to work like draft horses in some sort of dystopian world. We want to have leisure time to develop our broader virtues, to pursue a more rewarding life and not simply be wage slaves. And robotics and automation, to some extent, if it's introduced wisely and gradually, can be a good thing. Again, I'll mention social credit economics provides a way out, I believe, through Oliver Haydorn's book in particular, or you can go to michaeljournal.org on the internet. But that's a different financial construct and structure that we would need in order for automation to be a good thing. Under the current construct that these World Economic Forum and Bilderberg types are running, automation is in many ways threatening, at least to the extent that it's introduced quickly and unbridled, as you say. Then the displacement is so quick that people have little choice but to go on welfare or to work for the government, if the government even has the jobs, or to kind of fend for themselves in sort of a pioneer lifestyle. These are the choices under the current economic financial construct. And so on the one hand, it's fascinating and interesting, and it can be beneficial, but the way it's done and by whom and under what financial system is what really matters.
Absolutely. And just for anybody that misunderstands what I said earlier, I'm by no means a Luddite. Far from it, quite the opposite. I'm absolutely pro the use of technology, particularly, but it has to be applied in a productive way. And at the end of the day, that's what we're talking about here: positive, productive economies, what we would like to see, and not the type of economies that we're seeing developed at the moment.
I would just add that it takes people to make these robots. It takes people to make these machines and design them. So engineering jobs conceivably could take a spike here, could go up. But free trade and a lot of these free trade deals and immigration and worker visas kind of interfere with that and muddle up the system. The U.S. companies employing foreign workers under employment visas and kicking U.S. IT workers and engineers out of the workforce. That's not fair. That's not proper. So we'd have to make some adjustments there. But certainly there's design and engineering jobs to make these machines and to make this all happen. So it represents something of a shift as well, not just a displacement.
Indeed. Okay, well, look, Mark, I think we're just about out of time for today. I'd like to thank you very much for joining us. If you got any closing remarks?
Yeah, I would just add that keep in mind, viewers out there, that the federal government owns about 30% of the land in the U.S., about 635 to 650 million acres out of a little over 4.2 billion acres. The federal government owns 81% of Nevada and about half or more of Arizona. And so this is something that American Free Press and to some extent the UK column will be bringing to viewers in the near future as more details on federal land ownership.
Just as a final question then, is that real ownership or is this just something they claim?
It's something they claim, and that's something I'm investigating right now, is just what does the federal government mean by ownership? What is this land being held for? Is it just Agenda 21? Is it just natural resources? Is it some sort of debt collateral for the international financial overlords? What is this about? Because it's a huge amount of land owned, and it deprives the states and local governments of huge amounts of revenue and makes the private sector and citizens' taxes go up. So there's a lot to take apart here.
Okay, and we will be doing that in the coming weeks and months. Thank you very much for joining us, Mark, and thanks everybody for watching. We will be back at the same time tomorrow. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thank you.